Tonight's Bootstrap Book Club is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/ovali. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
Jen is calling it, but that's what we're calling it tonight. We were the former owners of Kickstart Kitchen. We just closed our business down yesterday. And if you're part of the book club or if you're within our community already, you probably have heard a little bit about this. I think over the last year, Chris and I have grown this business, realized that we want to go in a different direction, and so we closed it down. And a big piece of that was the book club. So one of the pieces that we knew we didn't want to just let go by the wayside was Bootstrap Book Club. We have read some amazing books over the last year, have gotten to know a few of the authors, and we wanted to pass that on to Jen and see if she wanted to take it over and really kind of make it her own. So she is going to do that. And if you're looking into, I know everyone on this video tonight is a business owner or wants to be a business owner. If you've ever thought about starting a business, you should probably also think about closing a business, right? Because eventually it will happen. And so if you kind of want to see a little snippet of how we close things down, why we close things down, and how to do it with a lot of love, you can check out our blog, kickstartkitchen.com/thedish, and read our last post there. Chris and I each wrote a post and kind of learn about why we did what we did and where we're going next. But
yeah, it's funny because this is a great way to sort of end our business. We started our business with the book club, the Bootstrap Book Club, and we knew that we wanted community to be a huge part of our business. It's a big foundation, and we were reading books, business books all the time, but really didn't have an entrepreneurial community to talk about those books and learn from each other. So the Bootstrap Book Club came up literally right after we got our website up. It was one of the first things that we did. And it's been an incredible community of women coming together, learning from each other, teaching each other, growing. And we are going to continue to be a part of that. But I think it's amazing that the community is going to be turned over to young female entrepreneurs. And Jen, she's going to be bringing some really cool additions to the club with videos and chats and tweet chats. I mean, she's really going to take it to the next level, and we're going to continue to participate in that. I'm very excited about that. But just want to say that we have a lot of gratitude for this club. And the last book that we read was Srini's book, our guest tonight, and it was The Small Army Strategy. And I think it's incredible that we actually get to do this transition interview with Jen on her OvalEye hosting service here and with Srini. It's just going to be an incredible way to close out our foundership of the book club and turn it over to Jen.
So Srini is here with us, and he is the founder and co-host of Blogcast FM. Almost everyone has heard of this podcast, and if you haven't, what are you waiting for? So Blogcast FM. He's also the owner of a company called The School of Life, and he is a surfer. He does all kinds of stuff. But why we asked him to come tonight was because he is the author of the last book we read as a group, and we'd love to kind of just get to know more about you, Srini, and how did you go from working in an office, which obviously you hate. I've read a lot about that on your blog, to doing what you do now. What was that journey like, I guess?
It's funny because I feel like I've been telling this story a lot, and it's a challenge to always tell it in a way that hasn't been told before. But it's funny. You brought up that whole idea of me hating offices. It's one of those things I didn't really realize. It was something that has always been sort of bubbling under the surface. It's like the disease you didn't know you had, and you go to the doctor and he tells you, by the way, you're going to die if you continue this. So for me, that's really what it was. I got out of business school, and that started the sort of journey of starting all these online projects one by one. Ironically, one of which was designed to help me get a job. You mentioned the School of Life, and the reason I started it was because I needed a way to stand out in the job market. And so that led to a bunch of other things. The School of Life eventually led to the formation of Blogcast FM. I did get a job, and I lasted for about a year and a half, and I knew at that point that was kind of the end of it. I think that I'd finally been, my friend jokes, he's like, so you've been excommunicated from corporate America. I said, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And so that resulted in Blogcast FM. The surfing thing is an interesting one because I'm like the least likely surfer in the world. I don't have an athletic bone in my body, and I have never been good at any sports. I was always the most improved player on every team I played for. And there's this great scene in 21 Jump Street, the movie, where Jonah Hill's like, you know what? And he's like, this is a participation medal. This is literally a medal for sucking. And those are the only medals I ever got in any sports. So I think that, the thing that happened with surfing is I fell in love with it. And it was this sort of great place to have a space in which amazingly enough, everything I do is sort of shaped and inspired by my time in the water. It's where I get my best ideas. It's strange because I hated swimming when I was a kid. My mom said I used to cry when she would take me to swimming lessons, but I feel more comfortable in water than I do on land, except when it's freezing, which it always is in California right now. It's just, it's one of those things for me. It was a drug. And fortunately it happened to be a very healthy one, but I could not shake the idea that this is how I wanted to feel all the time. And so that basically became a big priority in my life. And, almost, not to the detriment of everything else, but it definitely became important. Like, it was one of those things that I realized I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And so that kind of brings us to today. As you mentioned, I started Blogcast FM. That was in February of 2010. And since then, the growth has been pretty interesting to see. I think it's funny because I think that people have this idea that I'm, sort of this larger than life persona, but I've been very transparent about the fact that I've lived at home with my parents for over a year and a half now, to make this work. And it's getting there. Like I think that people think I have reached this moment where I've arrived, and I'm thinking I'm nowhere near where I need to be. And we're in this constant sort of comparison battle because we live in the online world where everything is so publicly on display. But I think this last year has been sort of interesting because it's like I'd planted all these seeds over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think what's happening is that, like, I think that people have this idea that a tipping point literally happens like dominoes. You push one and it just goes. And I think that that's actually not quite true. I think it's like dominoes in slow motion is probably the way I would put it. You go, like, I remember the week of my birthday a few weeks ago before I left for Costa Rica, it was literally like every day I was somewhere online, on some big site. Like, I think Copy Blogger did a feature on me on Monday. Guy Kawasaki interviewed me on my birthday. Like, it was crazy. And in the midst of this, we were running some really big interviews on our show. Like, literally there was not a place where I wasn't showing up online. And so it felt like there was this really crazy momentum. But again, that's 5 years worth of work. So I'm going to stop talking because if I don't, then I'll just yap on endlessly.
Well, I love that you talk openly about your community. I love that you're very open about your life and how you got started. And you have a real connection through your surfing with a community aspect already right there. So you're living community in your life because that's a very tight-knit community. I loved in the book that you talked about different levels of social media intimacy. Mm-hmm. So as you're already sort of exposing yourself, you're very open in your communities. How do you take kind of the next step in your social media intimacy? We've talked about this in our book club about how we take the steps from meeting somebody on Twitter to getting on a Google Hangout with them. But your audience is much larger and you're expanding. How do you manage that in meeting new people and really taking those relationships to the next level?
It's funny. This is a question I get asked a lot, in not in that exact way, but it's interesting because the part that I have to tell people is this is almost in my DNA at this point. I'm a connector of people, but let's talk tactics. I guess the weird thing is it's very strange for me to think of this as a tactical thing, even though I wrote it out because I had to reverse engineer how I've done this. One of my friends asked me, he's like, do you intentionally reach out to people and start chats with them? And I said, actually, I never have an intention behind it other than to chat with them. And my friend Megan Morris was teasing me. She said, she's like, I hate Facebook chat. And she said, and you're the one person who keeps me in there for hours. And it's really weird because, like, I start talking to people just because something happens. Like, here's the thing. Let's say that I write something. If you guys have been keeping up with me on Facebook lately, you probably have seen my creation process has been very public and almost, I jokingly have said every post I publish there, I'm further committing career suicide even, deeper. But the thing is, it's also resulted in this really interesting conversation. And I like that. Like, that's a big part of what I thrive on. And of course, then, outside of that, it's just, when I start a conversation with somebody on my wall, it's almost just second nature to me to say, let me talk to them in chat just to see, like, not everybody, because obviously, talking to everybody doesn't scale. And this is something I mentioned in the book, is that people, ask about, oh, well, this approach, how does it scale? And I said, well, that's the wrong question to be asking. It doesn't have to scale. So really, I think that to me, what it is it comes down to just starting conversations with people I find interesting. Because if you think about it, that's the nature of how I built my platform. My entire sort of quest of what we do with Blogcast FM is to find, interesting people doing interesting things that are worth talking about and worth highlighting. And sometimes those are my listeners. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're people, and even the people who listen to the show who are starting their journeys are often fascinating. So I guess it goes to a philosophy that, I talked about this in the book, is this whole idea of making friends instead of followers. And I've always believed that. Like, if somebody actually contacts me on Twitter, it's funny because I have this almost instinctual habit. Like, I don't, the first thing I do is I go and look at what their entire story is. I read their bio, then I go and look at their website. I jokingly say I've learned to become a very proficient online stalker.
You have to be, right?
Well, and again, I think that what, as I mentioned before, this is just in my DNA. It's not something that I have, like I said, I've reverse engineered it in the book, but if you meet me in person, I'm exactly what you'd expect based on having talked to me online. There's the gap between those two things is almost non-existent in my world.
Going back to Facebook for just a second, I noticed that on your personal Facebook page, like you were saying, you put out like these little mini stories every single day. Just, sometimes they're thoughts, sometimes they're more concrete, beginning and end type stories. And they're long for a Facebook post, right? And you get all this interaction.
And they violate all the rules of Facebook status updates.
They totally do.
Like,
I have
every
a friend
rule
that does that, and I would make him stop it. But not, your stuff is worthy of reading. But I would say it's interesting that you do this on your personal Facebook page, and I don't see you doing it as much on your business page. Is there a reason for that?
I get more engagement on the personal page. More people read the personal page, and that's a big part of the reason. I think that more people actually are subscribed to my personal pages. I feel like business pages, I don't know what it is. I mean, to me, Facebook is the actual mechanics of how to get seen is a mystery. I've never researched it. I'm like, okay, this is all bullshit, pardon my French, but I don't have the patience for it. And I was like, okay, well, this is easy. And it started when I was doing the small army strategy, actually, because I was noticing that I was getting feedback. And so this is actually, what was interesting about this is I didn't start it with an end in mind. I started it with sort of like, it was like, okay, I have to say something. It started out as paragraphs, like smaller paragraphs, and then it turned into this. And, I mean, a lot of what you're reading right now is actually part of what will be my next book, Confessions of a Corporate Misfit. But what I realized in this process, we talk about the small army strategy, and I'm realizing that, you want to build your army before you have to go into battle. In this case, the battle being the day the book comes out. So obviously, in the midst of all of this, what I'm doing is I am building a following of people who, strangely enough, will have read a lot of the content. But the funny thing is that all that content packaged together, I even talk about this in the small army strategy, is going to have a very different impact than it has had individually as all these sort of snippets that you've been reading, because it's going to have this arc and narrative when it comes together. And there's, stories and other things that I haven't included in what you've been reading.
Yeah, you had a great conversation with, I think it was AJ Leon, on something similar where he created this manifesto, and it was really a collection of blog posts, and all the content was readily available, or maybe not all of it, but most of it was already out there. But putting it together just really lit people on fire. And I'm interested in that strategy because I think as entrepreneurs, so many of us put out content, we're like, okay, now what's next? Now what's next? And we don't often curate our own content into a package that we can then reuse.
Yeah, it's funny because I noticed the pattern when I started looking for kind of, how do people sell their stuff? And I started looking, and when I came across it in a New York Times bestselling author's book, I thought, wait a minute, I've read this before. And I thought, holy crap, like this guy put this on his blog and then he put it in his book. And I said, suddenly writing books, because I mean, I've got so much content. I've been doing this for 4 years, and there's a lot that I can already draw from. I mean, I could be finished with the Confessions of a Corporate Misfit book, really, if I wanted to within the next week or two, but I don't want to be finished with it because I want to write. There's a real difference in my voice now versus a lot of the stuff that could have been in the book that I already have. And I want to write it in my voice now because that's clearly, I'm a very different writer. But I do think it's a worthwhile thing to think about. And the thing is that you don't, like you said, if you start to look, you can find sort of patterns and similarities between pieces of content. You can find themes, and you can find stuff that's already there for you to be able to take. We have an entire guide on how to do this, and it's free if you sign up for the Blogcast FM newsletter, or you go to fameandfortuneguide.com. We actually have a guide that walks you through this entire. It's not even the philosophy. Literally, just 22 actionable tactics in a free ebook, and where this is another place. Where we started noticing this was you're looking at sort of the world's largest media companies, and this is a cheesy example and one that either people here will love or hate. But I have the pop culture taste of a teenage girl, so I watched a lot of. Things like the OC and Gossip Girl and stuff like that. And Gossip Girl started out as a series of books, and then you look at what it was like. Okay, books turn into TV shows. Every TV show has a soundtrack. I mean, it's this endless cycle of looking at what they've already created and extracting opportunities to sell something based on what they've already created. And the funny thing is, I think that one of my friends had asked me when I did the first manifesto that I did. He said, "How come you're not selling this?" And I said, "Well," he said, I honestly, I'm not interested in making money with this. I'm actually, creating this because I want to give it to the community. This is an experiment. I want to see how many people it will reach if I don't put a price tag on it. I mean, even the Small Army strategy was free for the first 5 days. And even before it went on Amazon, it was available readily for a lot of people. I gave it away free on my podcast just to kind of gauge what the response would be. And, I think that the Facebook part, I learned that, that public creation process, a lot of people are really kind of scared to do that because, I've been very, very open, like almost to a fault with the stuff I've been doing lately. And I always wonder, I'm wondering if my mom is going to read this and she's going to hate me,
Oh, I doubt it.
So it's been interesting to experiment with. And James Altucher and I have had conversations like, we don't know who started doing it first, but he's been doing it as well. And we're like, he said, he's like, I gotta say I like this because you get feedback very quickly. But somebody had asked me about this. They said, how are you getting all this engagement on Facebook? And I said, it's weird, right? Like I'm violating everything that like Amari Smith would tell you to do. Like I go against all of that, or anything that somebody says, about Facebook status updates. I break all those rules, and for some reason it works. But the thing that here's what I would caution people against when they hear that is that I think it works because it's me. I think that there's this sort of idea, what we do, and this is something that is very important and something that's been at the core of a lot of, even what I've been writing about when you've been reading my stuff, if you read it closely, is we have a tendency to mimic rather than model when we look at people online. Like we look at what works and we try to copy it and like in some form or another. And I'll give you an example. When I was going through this process of starting my first online projects, there was a girl named Jamie Varone who had a site called twittershouldhireme.com, and it got all sorts of national media attention. I mean, it was like everywhere. And I came across it and I thought, okay, well, cool. I can do a very similar site. So I created one called 100reasonsyoushouldhireme.com. And it wasn't really very good. It wasn't very well done. I emailed Brazen Chris and I said, hey, I created a site and I got all this hate mail from people I'd never met. And and then I realized I couldn't come up with 100 reasons why anybody should hire me. It was really just the bullet points on my resume in blog form. And so I realized, okay, I've got a much bigger problem. Maybe I should go work on something that, will allow me to create those reasons. But the thing is that the reason it didn't work is not because it was a bad idea. It's because I looked at what somebody else did and I tried to copy it. And I didn't really try to come up with anything original.
I definitely think that's something that a lot of new entrepreneurs deal with. We've had a lot of discussions with that about that topic in our communities and our groups about almost it's the glitter effect on steroids sometimes. If you see all these different pieces that you like and you think work and they look like the people who are making it big, and sometimes they're not making any money behind the scenes. They might not be big, but they look big. And you think, well, if I just do that, then I'll have another piece that looks attractive to my audience. And I think people tend to lose their way a little bit. And it takes
Oh,
them
yeah.
some time to circle back and realize that. I almost think sometimes it's actually a process that you kind of have to go through a little early on in your business. You look at everything and then you realize, this is what resonates with me the best. This is what fits with me the best. And this is where I am able to communicate with people from the best. So sometimes it's kind of a necessary process, I think.
Oh, yeah.
For
Yeah,
early
absolutely.
entrepreneurs.
I mean, I look at kind of, I told somebody, I said, it's been 4 years. I think I finally found my voice. And and now I'm writing from that voice. Like I'm telling the most honest and real sort of the parts that I've been scared to share. And the thing is that what I realized is that you can't compete with that because nobody can compete with the complete and original the complete and unique version of who you are. Like if you're truly, and I hate to use the word authentic, but I'm going to. It really, if you are truly, like, forget the word authentic. Let's use a phrase that I came up with yesterday, which is, are you the no bullshit version of the person you are? And when you're that person, nobody can compete with that. And that's really the way I would put it.
So I heard that you were at Social Media Marketing World, and that's in San Diego, right? Here where we are. And you were talking about having a picture with a bunch of other, I don't know if they were podcasters or who they were, but they were people that you said, oh, these guys have huge audiences, or these guys and women have huge audiences. Do you think building a small army and the way that you sort of talk about doing it in the book and the tactics that you use, or the lack of tactic, I guess, that you use, do you think there's a point where if you want to grow that huge audience, you have to change your strategy, or can you grow a huge audience based on sort of the small army strategy?
It's funny. So first, I'll tell you where the term small army strategy came from. It was from a conversation with Chris Guillebeau, and let's be honest, Chris Guillebeau has a massive audience. 3,000 people are coming to World Domination Summit, so that should give you some indicator of the fact that yes, it is possible. I think that our problem actually is that we get into this mindset. I mean, there's two things, right? It depends on what kind of business you want to build. Like Mike Stelzner has 300,000 people on his email list, and I thought, to me, it was like, it'd be nice to be able to send an email and make a couple of grand, every time I send an email. But at the same time, it's like, wow, 300,000 people. How do you, it's a very different kind of business. I mean, and there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of people to a business like that. So I think, one, you have to think about what do you want to build. But do I think it's possible to become massive? I mean, I wouldn't say that my audience is massive. Some people might think that. I mean, Blogcast FM probably is listened to by a lot of people. I'm sure it's in the several thousands at this point. Some of who I've never heard from. But at the same time, I built Blogcast FM using the small army strategy. That's the only reason I know it, is because that's how I've built it. And, I think that what happens is that you cultivate loyalty in a way that makes other people go out and tell other people. Because I think that, we've never done any advertising to grow Blogcast FM. Every bit of it is grown by word of mouth. And here's something that's really surprising. I don't think it was our guests that grew Blogcast FM. I think it's our listeners that have grown Blogcast FM. They're the ones. And I was telling my friend Ralph Quintero, I almost feel, bad. I feel like calling them listeners or an audience is a demeaning term for people who have, been such supporters of my work. They're really, in many cases, friends, and literally friends. I mean, I've had places to be able to sleep, around the world for free. A guy sent me a suit for Blog World when all I had was board shorts and T-shirts. I landed in New York. I mean, so all these sort of amazing things have happened as a byproduct of this. So do I think that you can get massive by following this approach? Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that whole, conversation we were having earlier. I said, some people might say, well, the approach doesn't scale. And to me, it doesn't have to. And the other thing is, do you want a massive audience, right? The question, I just put up this update earlier today. I said, if you're catering to the masses, or you keep watering down your work until you cater down to the lowest common denominator, then you've got a good chance of becoming the next Honey Boo Boo. And I don't think that's anything you should be proud of. I mean, have you ever seen that? It's really, I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, millions of people watch this. Like, more people watched that than all of our audiences combined, like everybody who is on this chat. And that's disturbing to think that that's what we've reached as a society. So the question is, do you really want to create stuff that caters to that kind of an audience? Because when you go for the masses, that's what appeals to the masses.
I will say that, in the last 24 hours, we have closed our business. And in doing that, has been really apparent what it means when you build a small army with friends.
Definitely.
And we've just had like the best conversations in the last 24 hours from people who are like, you made a difference. And we're like, wow, we're going to walk away from this feeling good.
Yeah. And it's amazing that it doesn't even matter what we're doing next. They're ready to support us and be a part of it.
Because they feel like they know us and we're not honey boo boo,
Right.
thank God. So
Yeah.
I know
Exactly.
we can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, you guys made a great point in that they're going to follow you wherever you go, right? Like if you look, I mean, perfect example, like Andrew Sullivan, the guy who does Daily Dish. I don't know anything about him, but I heard that when he went off and started his next thing and he said it was going to be paid, people actually were happy to subscribe and pay. And so I think that, it's funny, we would always, obviously to some degree, we have a dream was like, hey, what if somebody comes along and wants to buy Blogcast FM and they say, okay, but we want it without you. And we're like, fine, we'll sell it and we'll go start another thing. Because the thing is, I'm fairly certain at this point, the audience would follow us.
Right.
Because, the funniest thing that I had ever heard, or not funny, but it was really weird to me because it wasn't what I thought. One of the people in our audience, she actually emailed me and she said, Srini, people listen for you as much as they do for your guests. And I was really, really surprised by that. It was it's one of those things. And of course, for me, that started to become the moment in which I thought, okay, you know what? Everything here has to be about, like you said, having an impact. Like making a difference. Like, are people's lives better off because they've been somehow, connected to me online? And that has always been sort of at the core of the way I've approached things. I always thought, leave people better off than when you found them. Whether it's, a simple tweet, whether it's, a Facebook chat, whatever it is. And I'd like to think, I've had people email me and tell me they quit their jobs because of the show, and I was like, there are people who listen to our show and use our content who are more successful than we are with the stuff that we produce.
And it sounds like you're doing your job. If people can take what you're teaching them and then make it something that makes a difference in their life, then really, what else do you need? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
Yep. Well, I know
you guys know. Go ahead. Sorry.
We could ask you a million more questions. We didn't even get through our list of all the things that we were hoping to have time to ask you. But I know we have audience out there that has been sending tweet questions, and I know we have to wrap up pretty quickly here. But we did have one question, and you talked a little bit about kind of you do a lot of this stuff, and we had a question from Kittia.com. And she said, how do you juggle all the press? So is there a point that you're hiring out, or do you still, because it's not really about scalability, it's not really about, are you going to build a massive audience? Do you kind of just retain that stuff, or do you really think about hiring out and having other people help you with that?
Right now it's just me and my business partner, David. He does a lot of branding and design strategy and stuff, but as far as press, it's really funny. I think people have this perception that I'm much busier than I actually am, which amuses me. When somebody asked me, Srini, when do you sleep? And my response was at nighttime. Here's the thing. Like, I am forced to be extremely efficient, partially because I don't have the attention span not to be. Like, I get maybe 2 to 3 hours of actual work in a given day. But let's face it, in corporate America, nobody's working 8 hours a day. Mostly the 2 to 3 hours of real work are being done, I feel like, in almost any situation. I feel like the thing is that, it's that whole idea that you basically time expands based on, based on however much time you have. I've noticed that when I'm the most efficient is when I have the least time to get stuff done.
Yep, like right before a vacation.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Zig Ziglar talks about this. He calls it the day before vacation attitude. And I think you have to approach every day as if it's the day before vacation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us. And we in the book club just really enjoyed reading your book together. We had some awesome conversations in there about it. And I think it just sparked some ideas for a lot of people that are in there that are either in the throes of growing a small army, or they are wanting to grow a small army, and just seeing how it was done well was a great example and a really good conversation starter for us. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And thanks to Jen for allowing us to have this conversation tonight. And if you're interested in joining the book club, you can go to youngfemaleentrepreneurs.com. And I think you can find a link there on youngfemaleentrepreneurs.com to join. And Jen will get you worked into the Facebook group. And our next book is Lean In.
Mm-hmm.
And our hosts are Jennifer Kent and
Chandra Russell. Yeah, they're very excited to host this next book. I think that it was a book picked by the book club, so I know that there's going to be a lot of engagement and a lot of good discussion and learning in there with this book.
Yep. And so thanks again, Srini. We really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, take care.
Good night, everyone.